critical sector of the industry, which is, okay, we are one of the most, I didn't say the most, which is aeronautics. And I am leading a very large supply chain with my teams. So I was in the heart of the earthquake, if you may say so. And I would be pleased to stop during the course of the afternoon and answer your questions on some very concrete stories that happen to individuals, to people, to human beings. It's not only theoretical. It's not only business or dollars, etc. It's also women and men that really, in this particular period, you know what you are paid for. I can tell you. Now, this is an important topic, and this is the first time, as I said, that I will be able to share. So let's see what's going to happen. Okay, let's see what you all will take out of it. Of course, speaking with a mask, giving a course is an absolute nightmare. It is the same nightmare for you to wear it, but what I mean is the expression. So you will be missing this. So let's see how we will tackle even despite this mask. Something else I wanted to say, there is a structure that I want to bring you along. I built my speech and what I want to share with you around, let's say, two specific topics. One is, and this is, I think, interesting, I try to start from the global perspective of the aeronautic market. What's in it for Airbus? What's in it for the supply chain of Airbus? So going from the general to the specific. Then the guideline for my speech is very much the strategic intent. You know, how do we strategically manage all this wealth? Second, we will go deep dive into one example. So I will share with you a bit my personal experience, but I had the luxury to be myself the head of procurement and supply chain of a tier one of the aerostructure. So I was in charge below Airbus to execute one of the strategies. So after we see the global picture, we will deep dive into real case of one of the examples that I will be driving with you. So it gives you a good balance between the vision from Airbus doing the airplanes and the vision from, let's say, a subset of the supply chain. In this particular case, it's called Stelia, which is a large aerostructure supplier. So it gives you a good balance of the two. Okay? Is the road, let's say, the challenge is okay for everyone, the road is clear, and the timing, it's a 3:15, and I propose, if I understand well, we close at 5, and there is no break, right, for this 1.5 hours. Fine, and I guess for COVID reasons, the break is a bit also of a challenge. All right. Before we start a bit more, just to also with the ones that are connected, is it okay for some of you to share with me how much did you get so far at this stage of your year in I don't know, visiting some sites of Airbus? No, I guess it's difficult. 0.
Yeah, we did went, but that was some people, not the whole class, but like the people who were new to Toulouse and France International. They got us to the Cité
Yes. So the Aeroscopia, is it?
Sorry?
Aeroscopia?
Yeah.
Where they are.
I think so. I don't remember the name. And we went into the actual factory floor of the those.
Okay. And then, so second question is, very often I have the luxury to give my speech after or before some of my colleagues. Just how much of the production of the aircraft have you been having as a course, or the finance, or the supply chain or procurement already? Did you have any? Okay.
This morning we got the first class in supply chain.
Very good. So this is just to make sure that I don't speak and bore you with things that you have seen already twice. just to connect. Okay. So, and if you have not been to the factory, and if I am lucky and skilled enough, I will give you a small gift. which is aircraft in the making. Let's see if it will work. So I don't guarantee that it will work. Because, is it okay on the video? Do you still see my screen? No, I need to change the.
Yes, we see the video.
Okay, I should stop this one and share this one. Yes.
But if you share the first.
Thank you.
It shows whatever is on the screen.
Thank you. So I look like this, but I am not that dumb. But I don't know all the. This one is not the one we use because of course you must imagine for the 1 year we are also using this type of things. I mean, my teams are in England, in Germany, in Spain, not all in Toulouse in France. So so I am the master of this is my best friend at work because I can connect to everybody, and this is my second best friend at work. That's how Airbus is working these days. But more seriously, thank you for the. All right, so I named the presentation Key Strategic Enablers for a successful Airbus material and parts supply chain community. So it sounds very posh and picky, etc. It's in fact very simple. So first we will look at the word strategic. For me, I tend to use it as opposed to the word tactical. Tactical is when I really have the aircraft is on the ground, I need to fix this, we need to find a solution quickly. The strategic is more, we are today, just after the COVID, we need to think about the re-ramp up of the aircraft. I will share with you in a minute. And some companies will probably disappear, others will buy each other and grow. The strategic vision is how do we, Airbus, let's say, articulate, how do we influence all this in order to build something that will be resilient for the years to come. Okay, so this is what we mean by, I mean by strategic in this afternoon. And why material and parts? Because the first thing I wanted to share with you, so you've seen a small movie, some of the building of the aircraft. Typically, if we take a pie chart, if that is 100% of the aircraft, you have usually a good 30%. Let's say 30%. Well, it's not a very good 30%. This is a better 30%. So this is the engine. So we are in, let's say, dollar value. Okay. So the engine usually it's a good 30% of whatever we sell to the outside. Okay. Then you have let's say another good 30%, which is called the aerostructure. So the aerostructure is all the fuselage, the wings. It's everything that is, in fact, the structure which is usually metallic for the A350, of course, a lot of composite. Then you have a good combination between the cabin and what we call equipments and systems. So what is the equipment and systems? It could be the flight management system in the cockpit. It can be the air conditioning throughout the aircraft. It can be the landing gear system, the braking system, and so on and so forth. Okay, and the cabin, it's not to be forgotten. All the seats, all the galleys, and the hat tracks. So all the thing that makes you feel as a customer, the feel of this is the airline, this is the comfort. So when we will discuss this afternoon, I will make a deep dive on that part of the aircraft cost and this part of the aircraft supply chain. Why? Simply, this is the one that I operate in, okay? And this is the one where, in fact, you have the largest supply chain in terms of number of suppliers, in terms of historical, let's say, legacy, with several of the names you can also relate to this region as well. If you say Latécoère, if you talk Latécoère to somebody that comes from Toulouse, it talks to them. Well, Latécoère still today is a large aerostructure supplier to our community. Okay? Interesting. Okay. So first, I wanted to drop a few elements of the context. So which context do we speak of? So still my vision of trying to go from the very, very, very general to the specific. And so from a context perspective, again, so pay attention, this is the first time I have the chance to also confront this with the post-COVID situation. In the previous 20 plus years, the context was not rate adaptation, it was rate increase. And this industry, aeronautic, has been it's a privilege to enjoy a constant increase of the production for the last 20 plus 30 years. Why is that? Because any one of us, and more in each country, wants to travel. And if you take an example, one of the most developed country for new airports and infrastructure is China, where I was in China the first time in my career in the year 90s, and to go from A to B with a train was just like impossible. Today, by plane, you go to nearly everywhere in China. It's normal. It's very. It has been a true, let's say, a key support to the development of China. And when you have the New Year's events, billions of guys are just crossing the country. It is by far one of the biggest market for us. It is no mystery that we did create 2 assembly lines in China, and we are extremely, let's say, cautious make sure that, let's say, our development goes together with the adaptation of the market, but also here I put rate adaptation. Why? Because for the first time in history, we had not only a decrease, but a dramatic decrease. So you read the press, you know that any company in the supply chain of the aeronautic industry has seen its turnover divided by 2. Divided by 2, you are in a business school, you know, when you do your plan, you try to get 5, 10, 20% increase with your fixed assets, etc. So this is your job. Okay? Divided by 2, that's a challenge. And it's divided by 2 for a while, because we had, when it dropped, the numbers, we had 25,000 aircraft flying in the world. From the day to the other, it went down to less than 7,000. You can imagine the shock. That means there was only remote places, a few airplanes flying, and the rest was grounded. It was worse than 9/11, clearly. And it stayed for a while. And today, I don't know how many of you have tried to travel by plane within Europe. I will give you a medal. Okay, it's quite extraordinary. You have to do the test before, after. You have to know. By the time you travel, the rule has changed. You land, you need yet another thing, and then you come back home, etc. It's a complete nightmare. So for us, industrial, adaptation is key. We need to have the visibility. How do we adapt to all this? It's an interesting challenge, which we will go in a minute. So adaptation and COVID, of course, context. Digital. Alors, digital, it's not only the fact that I have everything on my iPhone. We are here looking at, I will be more precise for you. I would like to take it in the context of supply chain management. So what does that mean? When you are talking about aerostructure on an airplane, you're talking about a couple of millions of parts of the aircraft per year that rush from around the planet to a set of final assembly lines. Or, let's say, not everything rush to the final assembly line, some rush to the pre-assembly and then assembly. But you have to have in mind, like, the division of like rivers of parts that flow into some hubs and then constitute the aircraft at the end. If you don't want that the delivery of the aircraft is an everyday miracle, because I remind you that we used to deliver close to 1,000 aircraft a year. So, and again, put things in perspective. In 1995, we were talking about probably hundreds of aircraft a year, as down as this, which was good, okay? 10 times more in 20 years. So that means that the everyday challenge cannot be just a challenge. It has to be organized. It has to be structured and, let's say, monitored. That's where digital comes into place. Some of you may be familiar with the car industry. Probably Renault does in 1 week what we do in 1 year, okay? But we don't come from the same position. You need to identify the aircraft as a product and all its constituents and the drawings behind it, more as a Vuitton bag where somebody does some very particular things by hand in a corner and it delivers a unique product to a unique customer. That's more where we come from. By far, we are not the very automatized car industry delivering the same car 25,000 times a day. Okay, so those two learn from each other. At least we learn a lot from the car industry, but we are yet to be compared to them. So digital here is a mean for us, whilst we are, and we have to admit, some of our practices are still very manual. I will give you an example. When you have the, you probably saw on the aircraft, there is the engine is attached to the wing with a big piece, which is called a pylon. By the way, it's manufactured just behind this building here. Oh, you go this way, a couple of blocks away. It's called Saint-Éloi. It's the unique center in Europe, in the world, in fact, to manufacture the pylons for all Airbuses. Okay. There's a second center, it's for Boeing, it's in the US. It's quite funny that your school is right next door. So this piece is, of course, subject to a lot of heat, because the exhaust of the engine is quite warm. So it's made of titanium. Some of the parts are absolutely unique because they are outside, they confront with the flow, the exhaust flow of the engine. And guess what? According to the way and shape and form of the part, you may or may not lose some productivity for the aircraft, because the way the exhaust of the engine goes out and the way it's interfacing with the aircraft could actually deteriorate or improve the performance of the aircraft. There are people in supply chain and in Airbus that are craftsmen, and they actually bend the sheet metal out of titanium in the shape that is planned. So we still have today, in 2021, so lots of people are trying to do machines and bending with using some standards and trying to automatize. But there are still parts of the aircraft that have unique characteristics that require some crafts and some talent. So very interesting. So digital, but still in a specific environment. Customer requirements, I shall say, this is a never-ending story, never-ending. Who would have guessed, okay, in the early days that Greta will take a boat to go to New York City, and it wouldn't be a joke. It is not a joke. Okay, she was very successful. But it made is it what we say in French, l'effet papillon, that the small move in a corner does have an impact very far. What is the number one challenge of Airbus these days is to create the hydrogen aircraft, so zero emission aircraft. Is there a connection? Of course there is. I mean, I have a daughter, it's probably your age. She's not Greta, but she's not far from it. And I've been Airbus since I was born. I mean, I am passionate about aircraft, you know. She goes to Paris by train. And I'm like, you must be joking. You know, it's a nonsense. You know, when you sit 5 hours in a bloody thing, I mean, you know, she says, there's a train to go to Paris, I take the train. Well, okay, so we have a bit interesting fight at home. But behind the joke, customer requirements. Who is the customer? It's you, it's me. Well, it's more you than me, because I'm alone, you are so many. So you are the customer of tomorrow. And if my airplane is destroying our planet, guess what? You won't take the airplane. You are clever. I mean, it's an evolution. So we need to be extremely careful. The customer is king. Huh? So you enter the plane delivers a seat to you. If it's empty, the airline is just bankrupt. They can't buy airplanes. The whole thing falls into pieces. So we need to constantly be ahead of time. Give you another example, which is, again, it's important to set the scene. Huh? When we did in the early 2000, there was a big a revolution, a bit like the Concorde. It was called the future A380. So unfortunately today, it's the death of the bloody airplane. I was lucky to be part of the group that created the A380. And guess what? At the time, we were still on the drawing boards trying to find a concept. problem at the time was not greener aircraft, it was the noise. It was London, so there are some norms for the noise for takeoff and landing. And we had a paper aircraft, of course, it was drawings there, we were selling it to many airlines to make sure that we had launch customer that would pay upfront to secure the business case. And in front of us, we had our main competitor, Boeing. And the main company with whom we were dealing said to us, well, the characteristic of your aircraft do not meet today the noise requirement of, let's say, in 5 years' time. Although by the time you develop and you sell and you produce your aircraft, we will be exactly during this period. And if we can't operate our aircraft in London without a huge penalty, no way. And they said to us, by the way, your competitor doesn't. So we were fighting like mad. It has cost us a fortune. So engineers reopened all the drawings, etc. And we finally committed and designed an aircraft that could meet the job. So just to tell you how important those topics can be. It's a deal or break. It's a killer. Shareholder value, again, I feel comfortable. I'm in TBS here. Shareholder value, bear with me, ED, so Stone Age, so it's before this century, I should say. Aeronautic was a lot of, let's say, governmental things. Aerospatial, British Aerospace, Deutsche Aerospace, all of which were backed by government. None of those companies had the means, the financial means, to develop one of those products. So it's a, you could say, is it, you know, the country pride, independence, etc. Guess what? It's exactly the same today. Huh? If you look at Boeing, if you look at the numbers, they have a double-digit billions debt. That's a deficit, and they're still living. Why? Because it's too big to fail. I mean, Trump, Biden, nobody can, you know, survive with a country without aeronautic when you are called, you know, US or China, etc. So at the time, no shareholder value. It was a pure governmental affair. So it was purely skills, job force, resources in different regions, knowledge, job creation, etc., etc. 30 years after, we have a privately owned company. We are listed on the stock market. We have to report on what we do. We stopped A380 precisely to feed the market, to say, well, okay, we stopped, it's no more profitable, although the aircraft is fantastic. But those discussions, some of those moves that we do are much more influenced by the shareholder. Okay? Any questions on this context? Yeah? Nobody asked me why you had this little drawing here. Maybe you're not too technical, but just it's a bit of fun. It's a 3D printing of a part on the aircraft. And it's just to illustrate the fact that our ancestors, they were taking a big block of aluminum and they drill material away and they do the part. So sometimes you have, and think about carbon footprint or eco-friendly. So that means you have probably 3 tons worth of material. You scrap 97% and you have the part in the middle. Expensive, a lot of energy spent to create value, and a lot of waste. Thinking about recycling, etc. This is exactly the contrary. You say, I want a part that does X, Y, Z. You feed it to the machine, and it will drop material in the 3D where it has to be done, and the part comes out. So very interesting. So some interesting changes. Now, another thing you need to know, all of which are, of course, key drivers that illustrate some of the ways of working into the industry. What we do today has got a strong influence from what has been done for the last 20, 30 years. And I should say we are not in the Kodak industry where the guys died overnight. But we should always remember that, Greta with the boat, etc. So it is not, I have been taking the airplane once in a year. For the last 20 years, I was taking it nearly once a day. I'm exaggerating a bit, but at least 3 times a week. Okay? So imagine so it's a massive change. And I have to admit, I now have different habits. I will probably, when we can travel again, a couple of the things I used to do with traveling, I may do with video. So changes, we need to be adaptive. So the time to move for me is that in the past, we have had the luxury of developing Concorde, A320, A330, A380, A350 even recently. And if you look at the logbook of Airbus, but also Boeing, it's been a while since we developed an aircraft. And the next aircraft is going to be the so-called zero emission that you probably saw in the press. And that guy, let's be honest, it's going to be maturing 2030, so still a gap, and probably released between 30 and 35. So that tells you what is the challenge of the company today. It's no more to engineer a beautiful product and to position it pretty well on the market. It is to improve the delivery of the existing product portfolio in terms of quality, in terms of uptime, and to, in fact, maximize the supply chain and the industry that we have to deliver those products. Okay? So this is what I call the shift in priorities. And by the way, this is why I joined the supply chain, because I was an engineer and I immediately fell in love with this complex drumbeat of this vast challenge of putting in harmony this overall orchestra of suppliers, countries, etc. Okay, so industrial delivery focus, clear to everyone? Now, this I wrote even before we had this roller coaster of trying to reach the sky in terms of delivery, and now dropping completely. Maybe I will spend some time to explain you that. If you have, are you guys familiar with the bullwhip effect in supply chain?
Yes.
Yeah, you're familiar. So you won't be surprised to see that out of a very long term, if I am looking at here on the right, say let's take the A320. So the rate we said was probably 10, and then it went to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. We were trying, so let's say we've been slowly moving like this, and then suddenly we were moving like this, and this is when here it's COVID. Okay, so you have different stages. Okay, so as you could see, let's say this was probably, I don't know, 90s. Here we are, 2000, 2010, etc. Everything went pretty fine, to be honest. I personally was living many of those stages because I'm that old. But more seriously, I mean, I was able to, in different responsibilities, take part of the actions to enable the Airbus system to deliver all those airplanes. And guess what? When you are at this stage, I mean, there's a blue sky vision about 70. Everybody wants your airplanes. you are coming to me to get a new airplane. I tell you, yes, okay, come back in 5 years. So you put a deposit, huh? And then you come back in 5 years. Imagine how successful we are. Guess what? We were still successful because the other guy in Boeing was even worse. But it's not sustainable. So as a business, you have to discuss with your banks, discuss with your customer, discuss with your supply chain, and try to find the right move. How do I deliver my backlog? We had 10 years of backlog. 10 years. Which industry has got 10 years of backlog? It's insane, okay? Although if you deliver your backlog too quickly, you then increase like maniacs and then go down. So it's not healthy either. Guess what? We are lucky not to have delivered all our backlog, by the way. Equally, some things, you know, we used to say the trees don't reach the sky. Huh? There's a limit. So some of the bottleneck in the supply chain, they say, if you want to go above 60, I need to double my means, and I have to invest $10 million in a new factory to produce this additional product. Or I have to source a new supplier, etc., etc. So you understand the type of discussion we once had, although many of the champions of the supply chain of Airbus were investing, taking loans, putting money, dealing with the banks that were so happy to give money away. You know, and the banks would fight to be the one lending money to anyone in my supply chain because it was the best deal ever. Because my projection, 10 years of forecast, I mean, who can have any problem in that? And guess what? So COVID, the phone rings, and we go back to, sorry, yeah, not that bad. So we went like this. With the so-called bullwhip, as you probably know. So when I did this in the supply chain, it went. And that is probably the worst that can ever happen in a business history, because my capex, my investments, my loans, my reimbursements are all planned on something between this level and that level. So that is the sort of bandwidth of the banks and the guarantees, and this is where we operate. So imagine the guy comes to me and says, hey, give me some work, because otherwise I can't reimburse my banks and I go bankrupt. I said, well, I can give you some work, but nobody is getting my airplane. So the complete system is in chaos. So that's why you probably saw some of the decisions by Guillaume Faury. I don't know if you followed the way he's been communicating. The guy has said, we, Airbus, don't need subsidies. We don't need governments. We don't need to be back to privatization. Please don't. What we need those guys. So in the supply chain, you know, there's a supplier, there's us, so-called OEM, so Airbus, and then there's the airlines, okay, that are fed by the passengers, you. So what he said, take care of this guy. If we don't take care of these guys, we don't survive. Take care of those guys. If they don't take the airplanes anymore, we don't survive. We'll be fine. Okay? Our ecosystem is, if you look at the global supply chain, based on these guys and those guys. So what he's saying is, allow people to fly. Could you please align within Europe and we please go from one place to the other without taking the risk not to be able to go back, etc., etc. And you probably heard about hundreds of millions that have been spent, and I was involved with the government, with Bercy, etc., to support these guys, which means to connect the dots between those two. Is that correct? Clear? Let me continue. I would like to go on this chart here with something which is a bit more visual. I try to illustrate. Yes, please.
Sorry, before you go ahead, you said that the help was provided for suppliers. So is there like help was provided for everyone, or was it like a criteria to which the help was spread out?
It's a very good and delicate question. Maybe I should rephrase. Airbus as a corporate did not help financially the supplier. Because guess what? I don't have the means. Because my backlog is still a backlog. It's not a delivery that the airline has paid and I have the money in my cash. So I am also bleeding. What I'm saying is that these guys need to be, let's say, supported to cope for the time when hopefully they can ramp up. And so now to be back to your question, in UK, in France, in Spain, in Germany, there are the so-called aeronautic sectors, like in France it's called GIFAS, in Germany it's PDLI, and so on and so forth. So these are associations that are gathering those guys and are trying to discuss with us, the OEM, so me, Dassault, Safran, the top guys, and we try to say, for each sector, who are the key assets that needs to survive. So it's a bit like, I'm sorry to take this example, I hope I don't shock anyone, but I have this image comes to me every time. In Italy, when we were in the heart of the COVID, you know, the doctor that was in the corridor and he'd say, you will die, you will not die, because there was so much you can do. This is the same here. So what I'm doing, not every day, but very often, is I have lists of suppliers and sectors, and I contribute to select those that are more likely to receive what? To receive funds in order to improve the balance sheet. Those funds have to be reimbursed, hopefully, at the appropriate time. So the support we were discussing is coming from the government as part of the overall billions, and you probably saw in the US, and we're looking at hundreds of billions that have been spread across here. It's part of it. Is it clear? Thank you. What I would like to do at this stage is to go from the passenger, so you, me, to the supplier, so that we see and we check if we agree on what is expected from one another. So very simply, the passenger, I expect to have the cheapest ticket ever. I guess none of you is going to moan if you can fly for 25 euro to go from Europe to I don't know, to a weekend for a party in Spanish island. I used to live in England as a student. It was the case. I mean, it was okay, 100 years ago, of course, but you could fly for a few quid to Ibiza and from Manchester. Honestly, I only felt it was an opportunity. Today, I find it a bit tough because as an airline and as an aircraft manufacturer, but it exists. Okay? So we expect to have attractive flights. On time, no delay, of course, this is the quality of the customer. As a customer, you want to not waste your time. Safety and quality, we used to say that our you know, it's the safest place on Earth, the airplane. Okay, we had some troubles from the Boeing side, which was, by the way, making a complete disaster from a perception point of view, because you may say, oh, okay, it's Boeing, and no, it was an aircraft. And those two crashes and the lack of trust, you know, you connect between Trump, some complacency between the agencies and the aircraft manufacturer, that doesn't smell good. So this is attacking here. Entertainment, comfort, and services. I will tell you a story that which is not related to commercial aircraft, but I was also involved into business aviation. So guys that pay $70 million for their jets. So the guy arrived to the airport. He's usually having a limousine with a chauffeur. He's having his telephone, and he's got 4, 5Gs, and he's a seamless guy. So he's business, etc. He enters into his 70 million aircraft, and there he's like 20 years back, because in the aircraft, up until recently, the connection was very poor. And you will experience, I'm sure, that in the past we enter an aircraft, okay, you switch off your telephone, and that's it. So it has improved in the meantime. Okay, what do we want from, so the airlines want from the aircraft manufacturer? I will go quickly, a couple of things. Then the aircraft manufacturer wants from the supply chain the on-time supply of the product, the quality, flexibility to adapt to the rate, competitive pricing to survive, because this is something, if you can remember that in your future jobs, if you ever look to procurement or supply chain, my favorite quote is to say, one of my favorite quotes, I don't buy your product, I sell your product on my airplanes. And it's very much, you know, when you try to change the paradigm, it's a transaction, but at the end, it's not a transaction. Because if your product are poor, I will not sell my aircraft, and you won't sell your product anymore. So it's very interesting. It's how do you change the product? Innovation is of course key, and this is also the luxury. I'm sure you Google it, or you find on different network all these guys that are doing this aircraft of the future that are either electric or that they are taking off. They have taxi for the congested areas, etc. So this is all about innovation. This will be the aircraft of the future. Okay. Any questions on this one? Here I want to connect now to some things which are very much the heart of what we use in our daily job in one or the other area of Airbus to connect. Reducing cost is a day job. Okay. If you want to go for 15 euro to Ibiza, I better reduce the cost. But anyway, you have to have that in your gene. Okay. If you come in thinking, okay, it's going to be a cost plus thing, you might want to work for the defense industry, which is a more stable. In the commercial aircraft, it's a constant search for competitivity, for creativity. So it's not cheap things. And make sure you don't make a mistake between I bargain, I reduce the price. This is carpet. This is the one part of the procurement. And I am an engineer, and I engineer the cost out of the supply chain. So I create value by reducing waste, which is a completely different ballgame. Okay, so we're talking about the second one. So de-risking and ramp up, this is the ability of the supply chain. How do we ramp up, ramp down? And de-risking, I will give you an example. I have a very good supplier. He has ability to ramp up. He has blue collars, capex, machines, the material, everything is absolutely okay. Fire. There's an electrical mistake during the night. The factory sets in fire. Okay, it's half burned. So we can still use half of the factory. You soon discover that there have been toxic gases or whatever. You can't use I don't know, the guys need to make an audit from the insurance company and so on and so forth. You're blocked. Your supply chain discussion between Russia and Crimea. It was in the year 2013, 2014. So Boris Yeltsin was, not Boris, but Russia was very much confronting Europe with this war in Crimea. the number one supplier of titanium for Boeing and Airbus is Russia. Number one. And this is the best and by far. What we had to do, de-risking, and this is a strategic decision from a group perspective. For airplanes, helicopter, whatever you name it, for the complete portfolio of Airbus, we decided to create a portfolio in a strategic place in Europe, where we piled up various stages of titanium products. What I mean stages is to make a part in titanium, you have to start with a billet. I don't know whether you are familiar with this, and then you will eventually do some plates. And you can also do some of these billets will be used for forgings, so large pieces of forgings. And then those will eventually be the final plate, because you will cut some parts in there, which will be nested. And then you have the final part, which is whatever. And here it's a very thin part. It's my famous 97% of scrap. So we have been taking some of these, stock, couple of hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay, so not everybody can do that. Okay, so we are talking about money which is skyscraping. Why? Because here the strategic stock, the de-risking in this case, was nearly at the level of a nation. I remind you the level of we are talking about a procurement volume in Airbus, which is around $50 billion. $50 billion. Latest I was checking, it's the equivalent of the 17th GDP of a country in the world. So Airbus in itself is nearly sometimes the size of a small nation. Okay. In that particular case, yes, we were discussing with, let's say, some of the with the Quai d'Orsay in France to understand what was the rate of the risk for that war to escalate, whether we would be risking the fact that we would not be allowed to get those titanium from Russia anymore. And we had to create this stock. So it's not a simple thing, because you can't just throw hundreds of millions out like this. We had to equilibrate on the various products. This is a pure strategic supply chain initiative. This is part of the type of jobs you would find should you continue in this direction. Now, eco-efficient and sustainable global footprint. At lunch, I was listening to a broadcast, probably you heard it, where Nike has been yet again under the spotlight, because they are supposed to have used their Chinese factory, was using subcontractors in some countries where the people were under stress. We would not have child abuse this time. It's more communities that were abused and with very low rates, salaries, etc. This is a disaster. Okay, I don't know. The same daughter of mine, she cannot wear Nikes. Okay, if I buy Nikes to her, she's put to the bin. So, and I like to test these type of things. I mean, she's not, by the way, she's not a terrorist, but I think she adapts pretty well to the values. She has values. She's respecting those, and she said, "Well, I have the choice. I'd rather, even if it's less expensive, not get those." We are in Airbus extremely conscious about this, and in supply chain, you cannot believe how much this plays a role. Give you an example. We had in the suburbs of Paris, there is a subcontractor that is a tier N to one of our factory building parts for helicopter. So it's quite far from here, far from the airplane, far from Airbus. Never mind. That factory is processing some bath of toxic liquids to in fact do some surface treatment of some of the parts that are that needs a bit of strengthening for the purpose of the aircraft. Okay, so you take the part, you put it in the surface treatment, then it dries, then there are some further steps, all of which is fully under control. The problem is there was I don't know, a mistake, an accident, or name it, where some of these toxic gases dropped out of the factory. The factory is in the middle of the suburb of Paris, next to a school. What happened? Monday morning, big title, Airbus, kids, the school, etc. It's normal, okay? And it's the maximum price we had to pay. So is it Airbus' fault? Too late, okay? So my job is to relentlessly check, remind, audit, challenge, stop, by the way, some factories, and redirect to the guys that did the right investment, etc. This one, I tell you, it's a career stop. If you did not take care of that, and I think it's normal, by the way, from an ethic point of view. I'm quite glad that we have this development. Okay, I think I bore you enough with the subject. Now, innovation is probably more, let's say, more fun. Innovation for me, people think very often about the product. You think innovation about the guy that invented the iPhone, or some breakthrough. Bear with me, you can also innovate in the way you do your supply chain management, in the way you do your production, your flows. And I will give you an example later, where the way to manage the dynamic of the flow of product was so innovative that we reduce carbon footprint, improve the cost, etc. Okay. Alors, as a conclusion for this first part of my exposé, because then we will go to a deep dive on in the tier 1 of the aerostructure, I would like you to remember two things. The first one is you should not reduce the price. You should try to think, so what I call engineering, it's really try to think together with the supplier, how can I remove engineer costs out of the supply chain? So I wish I've been convincing, bearing in mind, and still today I'm fighting for that. It's a relentless journey. When let's say, 50% of the cost of the product are borne by the guy who asked the question. So it's me. The way I ask my product, the specification, the way I describe what I need, I build up to 50% of the cost of the product. Why? Very often when you ask for a product, you do not know how to manufacture that product very much. You know what you need. Okay? And the guy who knows how to manufacture, guess who he is? He's the supplier. So it's the second topic. We should generate value by aligning across the supply chain with the key suppliers. You need to listen. You need to, so wherever your business will be, remember, if you belong, so today you could say, oh, Raphaël, you are the king, because I am the OEM and at the top of the food chain. That's wrong, and we should, so I don't know if you guys know the classical transaction when you have the parents and the kids, okay? That's the usual transaction in the supply chain. This is completely stupid because you lose a lot. You just pressurize on price. You create distrust and and tension. You need to equilibrate. Thanks to data, you should talk with data, facts, and listen to each other. And then suddenly you have access to the generation of value. So it may sound theoretical to you, but there's years of experience. Whenever you talk to somebody and you ask him about what's your view, how would you do it? If I give you the pen, how would you design this stuff? It's incredible how much you can discover. So this is the first part of the speech. At this stage, before we jump into, let's say, deeper on a particular showcase with this tier one, any question from any of you? It's clear? So I always try to give numbers and sizing of the things. It's okay for you. So the 50 billion, the millions of parts. Good. Yes. Let's go. Let's imagine you are the CEO of a tier one of the aerostructure. So your job is to deliver those type of things. So nose fuselage of an Airbus, a mid section or aft section of Embraer or Bombardier. Okay? So you have a large supply chain, some factories to integrate all that, and a selection of customers. In this case, remember the customer is it's not the airline anymore, it's the OEM. It's Embraer, Eurocopter, Dassault, Airbus, Boeing, etc. Okay? So that's why I tried this example to give you a different perspective. You have been given the key of the company with 98, nearly 100% Airbus business. Well, guess what? For those of you who know, it's what we call the carve-out of the previous aerospatial factories that has been consolidated into what is called today Stelia. At the time, it was called Aerodia. Okay, that's the story I'm telling you. So you start with this, and your business plan, because you are a strategic guy, you say, okay, over the years, in 2020, guess what? It was yesterday. So, I need to equilibrate 50%. So this is the natural growth of my market, and I will catch a bit of the competitors and a bit of the alternative players. So this is head-to-head fight, and here are the additional markets. My goal is becoming top 3 aerostructure. Clear? Alors, in order to do so, I looked at my my assets. I have so I will just get rid of this. So in this case, I won't look at supplier, OEM, airline, passengers. I will look in a different food chain. It's still the same story. It's more the value chain. We say at the end, I give an aerostructure. So the aerostructure was it's a piece of aircraft with the. So this is the finished part. Okay. Inside this. Oops. Okay. Right. Please don't quote me for that following. Alors, in order to do so, I have an assembly hall, which is what we call make activity. Make, why? Because usually in the business model today, this is what the companies keep as a core business. They don't buy this, they do it because it's where you integrate the value, where you also honestly finish the buffer when you have problems, when you have small down quality, and that before you give it to the end customer. So here is the quality gate, and then you go and you deliver to, imagine Airbus in this case. to feed the assembly, you have at least 3 streams of structure. You have one guy that does parts, and this is a make activity. So one factory manufactures parts. Those parts are fed into the assembly. Another flow is what we call buy parts. The buy parts is the market of what we call detailed parts, so the suppliers across the planet that are in fact specialized into either panels, stringers, all these fancy names some of you may know, they are here. But very often in the aerostructure, the guys are traditionally doing their own. And there is another stream here, which is sub-assemblies. Again, make and buy. So a sub-assembly could be, for example, a small section of the aircraft, like here, okay, that fits perfectly here. But you can also buy each of those frames, okay, separately, and it's all assembled here. All right. To feed all these guys, this is fed by parts, and here, all of these guys is fed by materials. So this is where you have the aluminum, the titanium, etc., carbon fiber. This is the food chain. So we are going to look together. How do you drum beat this, those, and the complexity in order to drum beat here the delivery to the end customer? You must imagine here the lead time is not the same. Some of the stuff you have to order very, very, very early. You will be paid very late. So imagine cash flow. The more you ramp up, the more you are exposed, because this you need to buy early with a great quantity, and you will be paid later when all of these transform into products that are paid. Okay. Let's see some of the key lessons learned about how do you, in fact, operate a sourcing strategy to sustain the strategy of the CEO that you are, which you want to become a top 3 aerostructure. First, you need to remember that in a natural breakdown of the aircraft, we are no more in the pie chart here. I want to tell you that if this is $100, this is probably $20, and this is $80. So multiply by how many millions you want. So that means you need to remember that in the value analysis of the aerostructure in the aircraft industry, and in particular in France, it's less so in Germany, for instance. We have a tendency to be extremely supply chain driven for the cost of our product. And this is why the COVID, for instance, has been not too dramatic for Airbus itself, because Airbus is the same, huh? It's 100-20-80. Because Airbus had to adapt within the 20, but the biggest adaptation, of course, in proportion, was made here. So if you think about it, when it was the same for the engineering, for example, the largest portion of the engineering is outside Airbus. It's subcontracted. So when we stop doing studies or when we reduce, these guys suffer 10 times more than us. Okay. C'est important to do. Alors, 4 topics. Total cost of ownership, for me, it's in parallel, to be put in parallel to when we had the topic on You remember when I said to you, think about cost, don't think about price, and think about engineer cost out of the supply chain. It's a similar thing here. In fact, imagine if I have, and that usually is the case in a big company. There's a guy that is in charge to buy this. Okay? So he will make the best contract to get this. Probably he will deal with lead time, with volumes. If you buy, I don't know, above 100, you will have so much production, etc. If the guy doesn't connect well with the guy that is buying those, you may have a disconnect, and that's to acquire the materials to do those parts. In fact, you need to get to the threshold that will either completely destroy your cash position or you will never access to the conditions that have been properly managed. So this is part of the total cost of ownership. Another part is that, I will give you a technical example. There is, when you do some very complex part of the aircraft, for example, you have large frames. So these large frames that are connecting, and on those frames you put the skins, and it creates the fuselage. Those large frames are usually coming out of forgings. So it's billets, pressed, and then we machine those forgings to remove the remaining, let's say, titanium or aluminum, and then we have the parts. Guess what? If you are extremely efficient in machining, you can do that very quickly. So you are cheap because you spend less time. So you say, wow, the part is very cheap. Fortunately, if you are too quick and if you're not precise enough, the frame comes out of the machine like this, completely twisted. It's called stress retention, etc. So what people do, they put this, they lock it on a machine, and they, with a hammer and with some manual work, they try to recalibrate the part. There, from one thing which used to look very nice and cheap, it becomes manual intensive, and it's very, very, very expensive. Total cost of ownership is the price from the start to the end. Another guy comes into place and say, well, we did some studies, simulation on the computer, and we've invested into that very, very good machine. Of course, the rate, dollar per hour is much higher, but at the end, the guy, he does a part, and it's perfect. No rework. The part goes directly to the machine, to the assembly line. There, the total cost of ownership is key, because if you don't have that, you will make the wrong choice. Okay, so it's always trying to look at the bigger picture. Lean supply chain. This is, you guys familiar with the lean concept in a factory with flows, etc. Here, when we talk lean supply chain, it's the fact that you don't think, again, about your corner, where the guy says, in my sub-assembly, I can tell you everything is dead lean, but I have no clue what's coming forward and after. So the lean supply chain is this concept adapted to a continuous flow. So it's making sure that you are properly drum beating the material flow, the stock, sometimes we use VMI, which is the vendor managed inventory with min and max, etc., across the flow. I have a terrible example that I can remember where a colleague of mine was sharing his best practice on a manufacturing floor, which was fantastic. There was all these height tools and fixtures to get a lean product across the way. And half of the shop floor was stopped. And it was simply because the inflow of parts or product, or I don't remember exactly what, had not been managed properly. So they were clearly lacking the end-to-end vision. Global sourcing, alors, equally, you remember we said we we need to take care of the carbon footprint, also in terms of the manufacturing. Reduce the waste, trying to be conscious about all this. Today, or yesterday, we could get the best titanium, and we said it's in Russia. So it's not only in Russia, it's east of Russia. So it's in the middle of the Ural. Okay. So they say they produce the stuff here. At the time, for our A350 product, the only place in the world that could do the machining of such forgings to do the some big beams on the wing was in California. So Ural, West Coast. And where did we fit that part? Roughly in the middle, in the UK. So imagine the travel of this part across the world before it fitted on the aircraft. That today, when you say global sourcing, that today is completely irrelevant. It was still the case 5 years ago, etc. It's completely gone. It's a complete disaster. What would we do today? Today we are saying the counter-example. I said that in China we have a large market. This large market called for local delivery of aircraft. And guess what? By COVID times, more than ever, we were in China the first one to restart the delivery of aircraft before anywhere in the world. Although, if you only deliver the aircraft, it makes little sense. So you have to do several of those stages. What we call local for local. So in this case, you are no more trying to do the traditional global sourcing, what we call low-cost country or best-cost country. What you're trying to do, you're trying to address the customer by delivering aircraft where they are being sold and distributed. And once you do that, since you want to take care of the carbon footprint and the lean supply chain, you want to maximize the development in that particular country of those different stages of the supply chain. Today, I am developing some of this, some of that in Asia in order to feed this so that this can be efficient for my Chinese colleagues. Some of which will be done by Airbus, others will be done by our supply chain, but it will be done locally. Okay, so that's what we call local for local. So these are extremely dynamic changes in the supply chain. Ethics and performance. So ethics is all about the bribery, the equal chances to win a call for tender, and you probably heard that Airbus had not much in the procurement, more in the sales process. We've been on the spot. We had to pay 3.6 billion euro of fine, which was tough because of us being in practices of using intermediates, etc. So ethics is key in our business. It can destroy a company. Any questions on this one? Here? Oops. What I just described here is 4 key strategy elements on which, at the time, you could set targets, requirements, guidelines for all of your team to produce some strategic, let's say, strategic sourcing ideas. The vision, join the top 3, describing a sourcing vision across these elements, and let's look at the implementation. And I remind you, if you want to be in the top 3, you gotta have a very strong supply chain, otherwise, you cannot win by just implementing some smart ideas on 20% of your cost base. You have to be extremely well connected to the rest of the supply. Now, supplier relationship management is very clear. There is a large population of suppliers that want to play with you. As long as you set the expectation very clearly in the start, you cannot be blamed for not being clear. You have your 4 strategy elements. You explain your expectation, you explain the threshold. Simply, you embark a few of the suppliers with you into what we call a competitive partnership, I will explain. And simply, those that are not happy with those or cannot follow you on those guidelines, that's a key criteria for long-term strategy. Again, I'm here talking about long-term. I'm not talking about the one or the other choice you have to do for the week and tomorrow. Although, in this type of jobs, when you do sourcing and supply chain management, you always have to make sure that when you do a choice today, it is not driving you at the opposite of where you want to go in 10 years. Because there, the drive will be quite long. You cannot say that everything you do is completely aligned. It's not true. But at least you need to have a vision to make sure that you are, connected to your vision. I hope. Try to be pragmatic here as well. Now, let me illustrate how you could, and I invite you to do so. It's extremely powerful. How you could evaluate, drive, let's say, monitor the relationship with the supplier. First, you have an axis which is a key axis for supply chain management, which is PERFO, on time, on quality, on cost. This is absolutely key. So any supplier management needs to have its KPI as a radar screen very clear. So where is my expectation, my contract, my market, etc. So here you have the low and high level. The second one is less known. It's more subjective, so you need to be adapting it to your own skill set, to your own environment, to your own company, which is the level of partnership. I can tell you there is not much difference. I don't know you as an individual, but somebody that has trust from the partner, from the boss, delivers 25% more than the one that is in doubt. And I can tell you, in terms of management practices, this is every day the truth come back. I mean, so the level of partnership, trying to build trust and confidence, it's paramount. So read anywhere you want. This is the most or the least developed skill in our business, unfortunately. So I only invite you to take it with you as part of this course. In terms of the threshold, you will be surprised to see that I particularly set the market requirement above the contract requirement. Why? If you remember my example of the London noise for the 380, the London noise was not the contract requirement. It was the market requirement of tomorrow. So the contract was here, the market was here. Although, very quickly, we understood that we collectively, not only Airbus, but our engine manufacturer, our total partners, we had to bridge the gap. And we could only bridge the gap if we had a collective approach to get this contract with, in this case, it was Singapore Airlines. So I hope you understand. So it's a bit like sometimes you could say, if you have, I don't know whether the image is good, but if you have an iPhone N, and then the market, as soon as you get it, it's N+1. Okay, it's already outdated. So this type of dynamic, I want to develop with this. Here, typically, if you are in a low level of partnership and a low performance, that's what I usually call a one night stand. You know, you wake up in the morning thinking, what did I do last night? So it's very bad for you and for the other. So it's probably the blacklist, the one you want to forget. Okay? No need to develop too much on that. If you are somehow in the middle ground, so it's the belly, it's the in between. What you want to do is you want to, you are not yet sure. Okay? Therefore, usually, what we do with those type of guys, we sign. So we have a contract. Okay, so by contract, you have to deliver on time and quality stuff. But since you're not yet sure that the guy you want to dump it because the company is poor, you see it's a bit of red in performance. So what we do, we make agreements to work on performance. So that means there is a threshold. Imagine the guy is delivering to you at 70% on-time delivery. You give him 6 months, 1 year, to go from 70 to 100 with steps that are connected to an action plan. That's what we call ACT. Okay. So here, you have to understand that there is a contract, there is legal, there is liabilities, and then there is reality. Here I'm talking about the reality, how to get the guy with you back to the contract. Bear with me, sometimes it will cost you less to spend money, pull the guy back with you, as opposed to dump him and find somebody else. Some of the suppliers, you need probably a couple of millions to develop, to qualify. So you need to think long term. Okay? And also you need to remember this trust. Is the guy dropping because in fact something happened? You know, I don't know, the CEO died, there's a new management in place, if they need an injection of new capital, you help them to merge with another company, and so on and so forth. But the point, oops. Now here, it's getting better. We have longer term contracts, the trust. Long term usually goes with trust. Huh? The partnership level is high. Longer term contract, I can place my trust with you and vice versa. And therefore, there is a very, very large correlation between the long term, the perfo, and the partnership. Everything. And then some specific cases, open competition. This is when, well, for this type of things, I mean, you don't want long term. I mean, tomorrow there is whoever does it better. I can take it. I don't care. It's consumable. There are also strange areas here where the guy is an extremely good partner. Suddenly, the performance drops completely. I would be, and that's what I was saying to you, I would be keen to spend money to send my teams on his factory to help him restructure the company, revamp in order to go back to the performance. And last but not least, I have my competitive partner, which is for me the golden opportunity. This is where the happy few are sitting. Those guys are. If you get the picture from competitive partner, if you are competitive, it's great because as a procurement guy, I have the most cost-efficient product. But I don't know for you, but competitive all the time means you run, you never sit down. It's a bit dry, you know. Partnership, there is a vision of we create together, we go and win new markets. So there's a bit of building, creating value together. But the flip side of the coin, you may think about a partner which has a big cigar and is sleeping behind a tree, because since I'm a partner, I don't have to fight anymore. Okay. So the good balance, hopefully, is between the competitiveness and the partnership. So that's why we balance the two worlds. And bear with me. That's why I said to you, the competitive partner, I take his product to sell to the market. So I sell his product to the market. So that's the end of the... Now, here I wanted to show you one example, which is a real-life example. So you have on the bottom, it's in this was created in 2010-ish in Tunisia. That was a swamp, complete swamp. There was nothing. Okay. And Tunisia was looking to develop in the aircraft industry. So we had, at the time, I was part of the Tier 1 young company, and we dealt with the Tunisian government to make a bet that we would create 1,500 jobs locally. And what we did, so it was finished in 2015. It's now operational. We discussed with a company that did logistics, maintenance, raw material, mechanical, detailed parts, surface treatment, and sub-assemblies. And guess what? We did, in fact, take bits and pieces of all these guys. So material distribution, it's the logistic guy, make, sub-assembly, and assembly. So the Tier 1 was Aerolia, was also part of it. So each of those factories that has been, at the time, were built at the same time, were built based on a competitive partnership contract. We had 10-year contract. The land was discussed in parallel with the government in Tunisia for each of those companies, and I was in charge of the overall integration, as much as each of them were in charge of the integration of their parts. And we had, in terms of the physical flow, a small convoy that would come from one factory to the other with FIFO and the milk run, where you would just take a part, remove the other one, bring it to the next assembly hall. Each of those companies are individual and private companies, but the value added was systematic in a circle. So you feed in material, you walk out one of these pieces of aerostructure that will then be shipped by boat back to the assembly here in Toulouse. Very interesting concept. It took us 2 years to build up. For the sake talking about de-risking, the day it was finished, the last paint on the last building, guess what happened? Those years, Tunisia, it was the revolution. That exact week. I mean, sometimes you cannot be always lucky. This was really, So of course, then instead of having a great success, we had Airbus on the back saying, "Okay, what is your de-risking? How will you deliver my parts, etc." I can tell you, that was a challenge. And I think this is the end of my presentation. Any questions? Any open debate? So if I wrap up, I try to give you the market in this context, what it does to Airbus, the key characteristics that we use to cook. So some ingredients that we put in the pots to cook our recipes for supply chain strategies. Given this, I try to give you some of the key recent impact due to COVID, hopefully adapting for you to get the feel of the impact. Unprecedented, to be honest. And we are still living it, by the way, it's not finished by far. And second, trying to deep dive into one example that I lived, and bridging between strategic concept could be paper or people thinking, wow, the guy is completely in his cloud, but then all of a sudden it becomes reality with complete buildings and deliveries and flow of parts and people. So I get all of you are very quiet. Any questions? Any comments? No. And I have got you speechless.
Yes, I have a question concerning the project Skywise.
Yes.
How it is linked to your job, for example, how are you going to implement it well? Because we saw also this morning that there is the issue about the data. You said that
Yes.
you have to share with
Yes.
the suppliers. But since there are so many suppliers, let's say, how Airbus arrived to the conclusion that they need this kind of data and they can implement in real life this kind of projects like Skype?
Alors, honestly, I will be humble. I will try to give you my understanding of your question, which is quite large.
Yes.
So first, Skywise is a massive marketing stuff. Huh? It's top because at the end of the day, just to give you a business model, we sell an airplane to an airline that obviously is trying to feed with us in there, and you sit in there, and then you're stuck for an hour or two, and you exit, and you're at your point of destination. At a given point in time, there were some analysis by our marketing guy that said that Google could challenge us on the market by simply buying from us this, so the fuselage, okay, or the aerostructure, and finishing the aircraft by seats that would be free. So with the business model, you go anywhere for free, but when you sit, you log in with your phone and with your data, and you start to connect, and of course they will suck your privacy, and you start to go and do business online, etc. So of course, this just to give you an idea. So to show how far we went from a business model to say, wow, in fact, we thought we are offering a structure, a flying thing, you know, to go from A to B. In fact, this is useless. This is cheap. The key is what you do with your data, you know, with your purchases, and how can I get access to you? To me, it's frightening, I wouldn't say. So far we fight, okay? Now, back to just to illustrate how important we take data. And then, not too stupid, we thought, well, if I am an airline, the airline has got an aircraft with millions of parts and systems, etc. I have, imagine, hundreds of these airlines, of these aircraft of the same kind. And I have a hub in Charles de Gaulle, one in, I don't know, Hamburg, and one in Madrid. I have a list of spare parts and equipments in each of these hubs that is well, let's say, spread in order to be to minimize my risk. Today, we managed, thanks to Skywise, to monetize some of data we used to have forever. We never knew how to monetize by simply doing the following. The flight, let's say, manager, the guy that needs to choose which aircraft will operate which route for, has now, thanks to some Skywise developments, we sell to him the fact that given the configuration of his fleet, where are the different equipments in spares, how long has each of his equipment been operating, so all data that we feed in a direct line from our system, because that we own, we have manufactured the airplane. We can tell him, you know what, for that route, you should take this aircraft because the mean time between failure of that equipment is leading you to take less risk to go from A to B with this aircraft. When you land, you can change the piece which is in the rack 20-3, and it will be on the storage 4 in your stuff. That has a value, and we could sell it. So this is just to give you the idea. Now, the link to how do we do it in supply chain, it's similar. You remember the bullwhip story. Why usually we have bullwhip? Because people have fear that they will miss, you know, so they over produce to make sure that they cope for the small delta. With Skywise, we try to load all the system from the suppliers, all the system from our demand, in order to, in fact, do a predictive demand. What does that mean? If I load 10 years of demand, I have a good correlation between what I really needed, what I could, what was my stock, etc. So all the deficiencies of my system. If I'm clever and I do some proper data management of the big data lake, I could say, I think I need this hamper that correlates for you, a different result. And thanks to my Skywise, I can give you precisely how much you should care for blue collars, square foot, titanium, etc. So this is, it's not yet there, okay?
Yeah.
But this is the type of thing we're trying to do.
Okay.
And take care of the time. Any other question? Just sharing one thing with you because I felt like it. Okay, I've been in the business for a couple of years, huh? As you could hear from some of my experience. I hope I was able to share with you that most of what I shared with you is based on real things. It's not. I didn't read this in the books. I was an engineer, so I learned none of this in my school. During the heart of the COVID, I really learned, so when we were, let's say, March, when many of us were seeing every week yet another country falling off, etc. I did something. I picked up my phone and I called each and every boss of the supply chain, of my, so let's say it's about less than 100 guys. And I can tell you, so they were located everywhere in the world, but some guys were, there was confinement, it was difficult to move, etc. Some were in the shop floor, trying to secure for their company, their employees, and I was the first one they talked to for weeks. It gave me really a feeling that was tough. That sometimes this is business. I talk about strategy. You have an ego. You say, okay, you are not selected, so I go with you. Those days where it was different. It was more on the axis of, if you remember this one. It was on this axis here. Yeah. It was very much here. And I can tell you, some of these guys, I know that if tomorrow I need something which is here, in this area, as opposed to here, I know they will give it to me. Because we reached that kind of level. So it was very interesting. I didn't do it for that purpose, of course. I was doing it to make sure that the guy was still there, but to evaluate the damage, etc. But quite impressive. Okay. Shall we close? Any questions on the remote team? No? Then I will wish you an excellent course. And thank you. Happy to share with you. Thank you.